Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Viva. I've been asked by a viewer in a previous episode to speak more about heritage. We've spoken about heritage in a previous episode regarding the built environment in Ploiești, where I happen to know the mayor and I happen to try to advise him regarding how to attract tourists using some specific attractions that only Ploiești has in terms of built heritage. And this is a topic that I very much enjoy. I like the history of architecture. If you follow me on Instagram, then you know that I post a lot of houses, buildings, and I try to describe their style and to put them in a period, in a suitable period, according to their facade elements, their volumetry. So I think built heritage in particular, and heritage in general, is very important for the history of a people because it does a bit more than just tell the story with words. Stories that are told with words, histories that are built by historians, have some narrative at their basis, are constructed around several identity pillars that are perhaps considered convenient at a certain moment of time. And these fluctuate. They fluctuate according to political opportunity most of the times. But the heritage and the built heritage more specifically, the material symbols that lasted from times in the past, are very important in framing this history with objective landmarks, with actual elements that cannot be contested, that are not subjective, and that can be accessed by anybody who just walks through towns, goes about their business in the center of a city, and these elements of heritage are all around, and they tell this story, this tacit story that you need to know a bit of architecture and of history to understand. But once you do, once you're up to date with these elements, with the ability to recognize these elements, then your perception of a city and the perception of a place in general changes a lot. So you get to appreciate all sorts of things that you used to pass by in a completely ignorant fashion until then. You start seeing beauty in all sorts of places where perhaps your eye was not drawn before. And in general, it's very important for the history of a people to preserve such elements of the built environment because they anchor the history of that people in time. Without them, of course, any story made with words can pretend to describe the past of that people, but in the absence of these layers of evidence, it's a bit vacuous and it's a bit superficial. And even without knowing the story or without being educated in a specific historical narrative, you can still make up your own mind and build your own story with respect to how the culture, the civilization evolved just by looking at its material vestiges. So more specifically, in the case of Bucharest, you have several layers of built history, and they tell the story of the city without the needs for many other considerations. You have the layer of the first churches, because this is what's left of the Bucharest pre-1700s. Just some churches in the style of the time. So the style was this Serbian Bulgarian variant of the Byzantine church architecture with narrow domes. Of course, the churches are Orthodox. You also have some Catholic churches that are a legacy from those times. I think the only church that is so old as to be before the 1700s is the Bărăția Church, close to, well, in between Universitatea and Unirii Squares, which was built by a Hungarian mission, a Hungarian monastical order, and subsequently taken over by the Bulgarian community, like several other Catholic churches in Bucharest. But before the 1700s, this is pretty much all there is. And there are perhaps some ruins. I know that one of the first courtyards, one of the first princely residences in Bucharest was on top of the Arsenal Hill, which was, well, leveled in order to make room for the Palace of the People, the Ceausescu building. And the oldest former princely courtyard in existence in Bucharest is Curtea Veche, the old courtyard, which is close to Hanul lui Manuk, close to Manuk Bay Inn. And it's unfortunately not visitable. It's been under refurbishment for decades, and I've never seen it actually, so I don't know how well preserved those vestiges are, but this is all we have in terms of pre-1700s. And from the 1700s, there are two or three merchant houses with verandas, and they pretty much fit into the Ottoman architecture. These are typical houses that can be found also in the Balkans. I've seen them mainly in Bulgaria. I have no idea if in Serbia they're also well preserved, but they're generally Ottoman merchant houses, and the majority of the merchants in the 1800s, in the 1700s in the Ottoman Empire were not Turks. They were rather Armenians or Bulgarians, and also they were not Vlachs to the best of my knowledge. So all the merchant houses that I know either belonged to an Armenian or to a Bulgarian. Like you have, for example, the house of Hagi Prodan in Ploiești, this Bulgarian merchant house, or Manuk Bay Inn from the early 1800s, where the Peace of 1812 was signed at the end of the Russo-Turkish War. And Manuk was an Armenian guy. He finally settled in Basarabia after it was ceded in this peace treaty that was signed in his inn, and he subsequently settled in the Russian Empire in Basarabia, and he built another inn in Basarabia, in the present-day Republic of Moldova. And from the 1800s, you start getting a lot more of this built architecture in Bucharest, apart from churches. Churches are a constant, so in every century you have some churches, but this is pretty much all you have, so no civilian architecture, no no architecture for the lay people. And from the 1800s onwards, towards the 1800s and in the early stages of the 1800s, the church architecture that used to be, as I said, this Bulgarian-Serbian register of the Byzantine architecture starts having more and more elements of Ottoman Baroque. All sorts of peacocks, grapes, all sorts of stuccatures, these stucco facade elements that have Indian or Persian origin and were carried through the Ottoman Empire all the way to its edges, to Moldova and Wallachia. And also some other Oriental elements, like some arches and some perforations that are also typical of the Georgian architecture. And in the beginning of the 1800s, we have a slow westernization of the architecture, just as the Romanian principalities start their exit from the Ottoman Empire. The architecture finds its way towards imitating Western styles. So from the 1830s onwards, there are a lot of neoclassical elements in church architecture. and these houses start to appear. They're mostly Ottoman houses refurbished in French neoclassical style, and some architecture historians call them the Little Paris style, that manifested itself all the way to the end of the 19th century. They were constructed in the beginning, well, in the early part of the 19th century in Ottoman style, and subsequently they were refurbished to incorporate all sorts of elements from French neoclassical and French eclectic style, and it's a sort of vernacular Baroque. It's vernacular because it's not the prestige style, it's not the original style. They're not houses that can be considered Baroque or French eclectic, but they are houses that try to imitate that style in a vernacular way, and this is why it's called, well, provincial Baroque or vernacular Baroque or Little Paris. Some architectural historians like Valentin Mandache like to call this style the Little Paris style, because it's typical for Bucharest, and this is what gave Bucharest its name of Little Paris. And the Orthodox churches, when they are refurbished between the 1830s and the 1890s, they are refurbished in this French academist style, so they get neoclassical elements to their facade, even though they are Byzantine architecture buildings. And the painting also gets refurbished in this French academist style. The iconography is painted over, and the more prestigious style derived from the Catholic canon, French Catholic canon, or the Italian Catholic canon, is borrowed, and you have these secular depictions of religious scenes rather than the Byzantine iconography. You have this in these churches, especially those painted by Gheorghe Tătărescu. He was the main academist and the main church painter that turned Byzantine iconography into these type of academist religious paintings, and you can find this on the inside of many churches in Bucharest that were refurbished in the, well, around the middle of the 19th century all the way to the 1870s. And from the 1880s, as a consequence of ditching the French influence and borrowing the German national influence, the stylistic register changes completely. You have the new Romanian style being developed with Ion Mincu. It starts as a variant of Art Nouveau, so these incorporations of stylistical elements that are typical of Art Nouveau, but as it was the fashion at the time, the Hungarians also built their national style using Art Nouveau, and, well, so did the Romanians. So it was this Romanian Renaissance, this incorporation of our traditional architectural elements from Romanian both vernacular architecture and of the Brâncovenesque style, the style of the churches in the 18th century, and this new Romanian style also manifests itself in the church paintings, so they switch back to being Byzantine iconography rather than Catholic inspired religious paintings. And there's quite a lot of prestige buildings that appear in the 19th century as well in Bucharest. The first proper edifices, the first proper civic buildings that appear in the city center, along with the systematization of the city. We have French architects that come and do massive public works, like Louis Blanc, Paul Gauthiereau, Javier Villacros is a Catalan architect, and he became the chief architect of Bucharest. But he studied in France, and he's somehow perceived also as being part of this wave of French architects. There's Auguste Lecomte de Nouilly, who does these refurbishments of medieval churches. Also builds some new ones, incorporating Baroque elements, and some of the churches unfortunately get demolished and rebuilt by him because he thought they could no longer be saved, and the stilistical elements of the medieval times are lost and replaced by something fashionable, but still a loss of heritage. And ever since the 1890s, with the advent of the Neo-Romanian style, official buildings start being built in this what is called the national style. It is officially made the national style after 1906, after the jubileum, 40 years of Charles I as King of Romania, or as Prince of the United Principalities, and then of the King of the Kingdom of Romania. And there's this big building, Palace of the Arts, which is constructed in what is now called Carol Park in Bucharest. It was just Liberty Hill then. There's this Jubileum exhibition, and this building that is supposed to be the trademark of the Neo-Romanian style, of the national style, it was called, as it was called then, is built, the Palace of the Arts. It did not survive the Second World War. There was also a fire there, so we only have pictures of it. But this is when the Neo-Romanian style became the canon. And from that point onwards, for about 20 years, every civic building, every administrative palace, every institutional building in Romania is built in this Neo-Romanian style, or national style, as it was called. And it is only supplanted by the advent of modernism after the First World War. So since the 1920s, Art Deco, this earliest part of modernism, arrives in Romania. Some would also put Art Nouveau in together with modernism. With respect to what we have in Romania as built environment, I would say that Art Nouveau precedes modernism, because modernism also comes with these new construction materials, simplified facades. And Art Deco is the first such style in Bucharest, followed by interwar modernism. And we have a lot of these Art Deco buildings. They're mostly in the Italian register of Art Deco. I don't know why. Romania, Albania. You can also find this Italian register of Art Deco in some places in Africa, like Libya and Eritrea. There were probably a lot of Italian architects that came to Romania to build these things. There was also probably the consideration of Mussolini's Italy as a locus of prestige, which needed to be imitated also architecturally, even though the typical Mussolini fascist Italian architecture is not that. It is the one of the 1940s, stripped classicism. And we also have public edifices from this style, like the Palace of the Government, Victoria Palace. It is in stripped classicism fashion, the building of the Transportation Ministry, the later addition of the Northern Rail Station, Băneasa Station, also in stripped classicism. This is the typical fascist Italian Mussolinian style, which was adopted as Romania entered the Second World War together with the Axis countries. And of course, from the 1940s onwards, we have, from the end of the 1940s, we have Stalinist architecture, which is, some call it Soviet classicism, socialist realism. Some call it Soviet Gothic because of the shape of the Seven Sisters. And Bucharest also gets a building similar to the Seven Sisters of Moscow. It is the Publishing Press House. And It mimics the style of the early Manhattan Art Deco buildings. Maybe it would have been better to be called Soviet Art Deco, but anyway, so we have that period, and then we have post-war modernism, the international style, so socialist modernism, and we have this free urbanism in which Bucharest is expanded into the nearby villages by incorporating lots of public space, lots of green area, parks. So essentially the idea was to create a low density environment by building these high density blocks of flats surrounded by nature, surrounded by greenery, by green space, and in this way to create leisure spaces at the same time as building blocks for the working class. And this type of urbanism and of these, let's say, low density areas fumbled in the 1980s. Priority was given just to the construction of blocks of flats, so density grew a lot, green space diminished. There were some interesting public edifices done in brutalist style, or not that many, but those that were done are quite impressive. Also in postmodern style, some instances of postmodern architecture, even though less in Bucharest, more in places like Constanța, Craiova. And finally, we have the neoclassicism of Ceausescu, which is inspired perhaps by what he saw in Pyongyang, by what he saw in China in his visit that gave way to the personality cult and to protochronism and to this national discourse on steroids. So the last period of the communist-built environment is harder to categorize. It has elements from Art Deco, it has elements from neoclassicism, and from socialist realism. Hard to classify because the period also lasted too little time to give architectural historians the time to settle the argument what kind of style it is, to do a proper classification. And then came the slumdog architecture of post-1990 chaotic Romanian urban development, where the profit reason essentially swept away any kind of aesthetics, swept away any kind of urban considerations. The only consideration was how to maximize profit, and these new ugly districts were built on previous agricultural land without doing any urban planning whatsoever. These new slums that somehow have some prestige because people do not have this education of how to appreciate the public space, how to appreciate heritage, and how to appreciate the built environment and how to evaluate it. And this is why a lot of people from the middle class bought houses in strange developments which have no public areas, no public spaces, no infrastructure, just layers upon layers of apartments like in slums of Southeast Asia. And unfortunately, Romania makes an exception out of all the Eastern European countries. All of them tried to either refurbish what was their previous national styles, the pre-war type of architecture. They demolished some functionalist architecture to build some edifices that used to stand there before the Second World War in their original style. Romania did none of that. Romania also built no beautiful architectural landmarks after 1990, unlike the other countries in Eastern Europe. And I could say perhaps with the sole exception of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church in Romania does make a striking note in this regard. If you visit Catholic churches built after 1990, they're very elegant. They are not traditional in any way. They try to fit into the postmodernist type of architecture, but they somehow manage to create a sacred space. They manage to create the idea of a sacred space and the feeling of a sacred space through geometry, volumetry, all sorts of ways, while keeping themselves in modernism. So being very sparse on the facade decorations and on decoration in general. I highly suggest you visit Catholic churches built after 1990 in Romania. They're very interesting, original shapes, all sorts of surprising features, and they stay faithful to the tenet of modernism, that you get beauty and you get aesthetics from the lines of the volumetry, from the shades, not necessarily from particular facade elements, just from the game of lines that articulate the facade. So this is how I see the heritage in the built environment of Bucharest. And I hope I've given you a taste of why the built heritage is important, of why architectural history is important for a place, for a country, why it tells the story of its identity and of its history better than the history books can. And if you like what I do, like, share, subscribe. And until next time, take care.